Hey everyone! Before we open today's file, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at d.s.radio, where you can find all the images that go along with today's case. You can drop us an email at contact.dsradio@gmail.com. You can find all of our socials in the Linktree bio on our Instagram profile, including links to merch. If you're feeling especially generous, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio, where you can get access to our exclusive Instagram page and make suggestions for upcoming episode topics that you would like us to cover. Speaking of Patreon, thanks to our Patreons, Riff Cult, Cropley Crab, Cash Broadus, Raspberry Jr., Jason R. Nelson, Creepy Paper, Jamie Sook, Michael Laughlin, Lindsay Keller, Mike Wright, Greer Weaver, Kelsey Carruthers, Linz Gibbon, Drake Holvig, Only Child, Michael M, Wesley Akers, Riaz K, Emily Medeiros, Pip, Heather Wynn, Graves, Devon Sweatshirt, The Ordained Sinister Minister, and Philip Hoffman.
Hi everybody and welcome to Dystopian Simulation Radio. My name's Chris.
And I'm Linz.
It's been a while.
Has it?
No.
I think it's been about a week, to be honest, Chris. But I like that you miss me that much. It really means a lot.
That's all right. You know, I don't just monetize our relationship. It's fine. It's fine.
No. Although you exposed that fact in the Q&A episode last week. Yeah, I believe you.
Go back and listen to that if you haven't already. And speaking about things that you should give a listen to, I'd really like to give a shout out to the Mysterious Circumstances podcast, which is a really, really cool true crime podcast. It's a solo podcast, which is something that I'm always really jealous of because I don't think...
How dare you? Fine. I can see where this is going.
Because you don't have to deal with... No.
Deal with me. All right. Fine.
No, just the fact
we
that...
can all go solo, Chris. This is where we have like the Beatles breakup, isn't it?
I'm really amazed when somebody can capture someone's attention just with one voice for an entire podcast episode. You've got to be really, really engaging to do that. So I would really recommend everybody go and find the Mysterious Circumstances podcast. I've been listening to it loads since one of our listeners recommended it, and I can't recommend it enough. So just search for Mysterious Circumstances on your podcast platform of choice.
And speaking of things to search, we have, well, a lot of people were asking us if we had a Patreon.
Here comes the money!
Here we go!
We didn't have a Patreon, but now we do. We've just started it up recently and there isn't much on it, but it's there and you can find it at patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio.
We're going to be putting lots of different things on there, hopefully. Right now, we've just got some basic things on there, some early support that you can show to the show if you'd like to. Of course, we still have our tip jar as well, so if you'd like to make a one-off contribution, we've had a couple of lovely ones this week, so thank you very much for those who've donated. But if you would like to make a more regular contribution, please feel free to head over to patreon.com/dystopian simulation radio and see what shit we're putting out there.
Come and see our shit, as Chris so eloquently put it.
Well, by the time this podcast comes out, we will have actually been podcasting for over 6 months.
6 months, baby!
Now, we've covered alien abductions, turtle riding liars, sea monsters, and Hitler's potential escape, to name just a few. And if you haven't heard those, please check them out in the archives on your favourite podcast platform. One of our most popular episodes early on was our venture into the crazy world of professional wrestling, when we covered the Chris Benoit tragedy. And since then, we've received several requests, mainly from myself, to revisit that world. So now seemed like a good time when I was writing this script when I was in hospital.
You want to explain that?
Nope.
Chris had a baby.
Well, I didn't have a baby.
And a nervous breakdown. No.
I was there sort of cheerleading.
Cheerleading from the sidelines as his wife birthed their alien child who nobody has seen yet. It's definitely a Roswell situation.
He's here. Actually, you know what? When he cries, when he like really, really cries, he turns into a grey. He like morphs his face and he goes from like this normal human looking baby into like this like alien baby thing.
A demonic entity. I'll bring some holy water over when I get back to the UK, Chris.
Oh, I love him.
So,
now,
Chris.
Yes.
Back to the what do they call it? The squared circle, the circled square, the shape, the thing.
The squared circle.
Squared circle.
Exactly.
Back to the squared circle.
Now, if you're not into pro wrestling, don't touch that dial. The tale that we're going to embark on today involves all sorts of conspiratorial and underground shenanigans, with a topping of fantastic costumes and pyrotechnics. So, this is quite possibly the most generic Chris episode ever. Pro wrestling set in Japan.
But this is a true crime episode, is it?
It is. So, we're going to open the file on Rikidozan, a Japanese superhero murdered by the mob. First things first. Rikidozan was actually named Mitsuhiro Momota, except he wasn't. He was really named Kim Sinrak. If that name sounds distinctly un-Japanese to you, that's because Japan's biggest hero was actually Korean.
I was about to say.
Even more bizarrely, by modern geographical standards, was North Korean.
Oh, how?
Well, he was born on the 14th of November 1924 on what was known at the time as Japanese Korea, during the annexing of the Korean peninsula by the Japanese, and he was born in the North area, which of course is now North Korea. Rikidozan, as I will be referring to him today, was always a fan of traditional Korean wrestling, and that led to an interest in Japanese sumo wrestling. His family refused to let him move to Japan to pursue his dreams, as he had a duty of care to his father. But in 1939, his father passed away, and he was free to travel to Japan in spite of his mother's protests.
Ooh, question.
Yes.
What's the difference between Korean wrestling and Japanese wrestling?
Well, one happens in Korea and the other happens in Japan.
You're such a dick.
So, from my research, they seem to be relatively similar. In fact, that the Korean wrestling, they wear belts and they have to use them to try and throw each other around in the same way that sumo does. But it's just, I think, slightly different rules and slightly different mechanics that happen. But it looks sort of visually similar. But from my quick Google that I've just done, it's more about wearing a jaunty side sash.
Thank you, Chris.
As opposed to, the rikishi thong, if you will, that Japanese...
The rikishi thong. Mwah.
So, Rikidozan joined the Nishinoseki stable in 1939, and he debuted as a wrestler in 1940. Now, a stable is like a group of wrestlers, and you can think of it like a team that trains together, and that would be quite similar to, for example, modern mixed martial arts teams, like American Top Team, for example. Rikidozan's Korean origins were originally displayed, but he endured a torrent of racial abuse. I remember that Koreans were being subjugated by the Japanese during the annexation of Korea and looked upon as less. He had been adopted by a Japanese man who had helped him to move to Japan to train, and in turn he took his name, becoming Mitsuhiro Momota. Now his sumo...
That's a pretty cool name, to be honest.
It is. I mean, it's got quite a ring to it. But
yeah.
Not quite as cool as Rikidozan.
No, damn, that's a name.
Now, he came to that. Now, his sumo career lasted for 10 years, and he finished with a win-loss record of 135 to 82 losses. And the name that he went by in sumo, and for the rest of his career, was Rikidozan, which translates to Rugged Mountain Road.
Wow, what a good sumo name.
Pretty fucking cool. Now, he actually achieved great success in sumo. He won several championships and he rose through the ranks. However, how he left sumo might give you a glimpse into the mindset of Rikidozan.
Uh-oh.
After a fight with his trainer over money, he impulsively grabbed a pair of scissors and cut off his chonmage. Ooh. Linz, that sounds a bit painful, doesn't it?
It sounds very extreme.
It is. Any ideas what a chonmage is?
Chonmage. It sounds like there's only one of them.
There is.
It sounds like he's cut off his penis, but I don't think he did that.
So in 1940, Rikidozan severed his... No, he didn't.
Well, I can't think of what you have one of that it's readily available to just lob off.
So a chonmage is actually the hairstyle worn by samurai and one which is now worn by sumo wrestlers.
That makes a lot more sense.
It does. He didn't John Bob it himself.
I was going to say he must have been really angry.
Now, this is actually a huge thing. It's not like sumo wrestlers cut their hair all the time. That's what
she said.
A sumo wrestler only does this once in their career when they cut their hair short, and that is at their retirement ceremony. So by doing this, he was essentially handing in his notice and ending his sumo career forever.
Oh, this would be an amazing movie. How dramatic.
Frustrated and jobless, Rikidozan began to work in the black market, purchasing items from US soldiers departing for Korea and selling them on to the Japanese. Remember, at this time, Japan was still occupied by the USA in the wake of World War II, and the Korean War was just kicking off. Now, it's alleged at this time that Rikidozan may have joined the Yakuza himself, but this has never been officially confirmed.
It feels like a thing he would do if he's working in the black market.
If you go into the underworld in Japan, you're going to quite quickly meet the Yakuza. I mean, he was certainly working with Yakuza. We've covered this very briefly before on the podcast, and I'm not going to get sidetracked into what the Yakuza is, because it would be a complete episode to itself. So let's just, for today's episode, settle on the definition that it is essentially the Japanese mafia.
Yes.
So following on from his stint as a black marketeer, Rikidozan tried to return to sumo, but was rejected. He was then given the job as a supervisor on a construction site run by Shinsaku Nita, who sponsored him heavily during his sumo days. However, Nita was actually a Yakuza, heavily involved in the promotion of events and taking a heavy cut of the revenue from said events. Nita's biggest revenue earner was sumo wrestling, and throughout post-war Japan, Yakuza have always had a connection to combat sports, potentially even to this day.
That makes sense, though, because you get a lot of, like, mafia things where they're rigging fights, you know, like in bets and stuff like that. So I guess it's the same. And I also like the idea of, like, this guy who sponsors sumo wrestlers sort of having them moonlight as construction workers when they've either retired or they're disgraced. Because, you know, you got some big guys doing, like, heavy lifting all day, and you're like, well, they're not in the sumo world anymore, or maybe they need a little bit of extra cash. And the sumo's moonlighting as sort of construction guys. I love that. It's such a great picture.
I mean, I imagine it'd be quite good for training as well, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's kind of amazing. Like, this needs to be a movie if it's not already one.
So while working at the construction site, the Masonic Tory Oasis Shiners Club organised a professional wrestling tour to raise funds for disabled children. And Rikidozan, as a somewhat celebrity, was invited to participate and agreed to participate after 1 month of training. He wrestled Bobby Bruns to a 10-minute time limit draw on the 28th of October 1951 in Ryogoku Memorial Hall, Tokyo. Now, during the match, despite realizing that he did not currently have the stamina for professional wrestling, Rikidozan was in love with the sport. What do you think he means by he didn't have the stamina for the sport, Linz?
I feel like, being an ex-sumo wrestler, he was probably a very hefty man. Mm-hmm. And I guess in wrestling, you have to... Well, not to bring up Louis Theroux once again, but I've seen Louis Theroux, a man who did not wrestle. Okay, let's be honest, he's not athletic in any way, but I saw him sort of say, in a Weird Weekends episode, say to a bunch of wrestlers, "Isn't this fake?" and them putting him through it like he was puking by the end of it. So you need a lot of energy, you need a lot of stamina to wrestle. Yeah. I'm not sure in sumo wrestling. I don't know anything about anything in this world, but I mean the wrestling world, not the world. I'm obviously present in the world.
But I guess you're just being heavy and shoving people out of a circle?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure takes a lot of stamina, but with wrestling, like, you're flipping around, you're grappling, you're, I don't know, doing all sorts of things, flying in the air.
You'd think surely that sumo, a legitimate sport, would be more grueling, but really there's two things to consider. The first one you already hit on there, which is that sumo is fast and intense, but the matches are extremely short.
You said 10 minutes, right? I was shocked. 10 minutes.
Well, the 10-minute match that he had was a professional wrestling match.
Oh, that was a wrestling match, okay.
Yeah, most sumo matches...
That's very short for a wrestling match,
yeah,
isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. It is. Most sumo matches would last maybe less than 10 seconds.
Oh my gosh. What?
Yeah, it's two guys. They face off against each other. They have the initial hit, then they'll push for a little bit. They'll either push the other out of the circle or they'll throw somebody onto the ground, and that's how you win.
My gosh, 10 seconds.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I'm no sumo expert, but I would say, from what I know, it would be extremely unusual for a match to go over a minute.
That's insane. Like, that's crazy if you think about how much goes into it, and then a match is just 10 seconds.
Yeah, or at least a round of a match would be 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's very shocking, honestly.
Now, the other thing to consider as well, though, is that in wrestling, there is something called ring shape. That is entirely different from being in shape.
Sorry, I'm being childish. Do you proceed?
So, ring shape is entirely different from being in shape. Now, often when someone who is traditionally in shape tries wrestling for the first time, they are huffing and puffing like an asthmatic after just a few short minutes. Traditional stamina, i.e., running for a long period of time, is really put to the test by the constant falling down, getting up, short bursts of high-intensity exercise, and variance in movement. Rikidozan did continue on with the tour, though, and he began to increase his ring shape to the point where he felt confident enough to venture over to Hawaii and then San Francisco on his first international tours. On his second trip to Hawaii in 1953, he had an opportunity to wrestle Lou Thesz. Perhaps you might remember the Thesz press that Stone Cold Steve Austin used to do, where he would throw his opponent into the ropes and then jump up, press his opponent into the mat, and then give him punchy punchies to the face.
Oh, okay. Inspiration.
So Lou Thesz is the grandfather of modern professional wrestling, the National Alliance's World Heavyweight Champion. Now, this was before the WWF became the only game in town, and the NWA champion was the champion, who would tour around the world, each wrestling territory, wrestling their biggest and baddest and defending 10 pounds of gold. Now, for Rikidozan to get this opportunity this early in his career showed just what people thought of him. And when he returned to Japan, he was determined in his mission to revive pro wrestling in post-war Japan. To achieve this end, he needed many things, but it all started with cold, hard yen. Money, moolah, dosh. He needed it all, and knocking on the door of his old sponsor, boss, and Yakuza, Shinsaku Nitta, he found the funds. And Nitta even provided a portion of his land for Rikidozan to construct his first wrestling gym on.
Damn. Wow, he's really supporting, like he's going above and beyond. Is this just so he can rig the matches later and rig in the wonga?
I mean, I'm not going to cast any aspirations.
Are you scared?
Yeah. What will they do to me?
Cut fingers off, maybe? I don't know.
I mean, being in Japan, being a Yakuza is kind of, I won't say it's a normal thing, but I will say that they have public offices and are listed on maps. So
what?
Yeah, so you can be a Yakuza legally. Mm-hmm. And
what?
You can legally be a Yakuza. It's just the activities that the Yakuza are involved in, which may be illegal, but also may be legal.
So you're telling me you were a teacher in Japan when you could have been Yakuza?
Well, exactly. I would have probably been kicked out of the country as a foreigner, but yes.
I'm sure there's probably like a Tom Cruise movie out there somewhere where he joins the Yakuza.
Simon Pegg will definitely be in it as well. So from there, Rikidozan started knocking on doors with ever-growing momentum. Entertainment promoters, television executives, American wrestling promoters, and international wrestling stars all answered the knock. Before he knew it, on the 19th of February 1954, the debut show of the Japan Pro Wrestling Alliance, or JWA, was held. It was headlined by Rikidozan and Masahiro Kimura versus Ben and Mike Sharp. And suddenly, Japan was introduced to American-style pro wrestling through TV screens around the capital and beyond. Now, throughout history, the bad guys, or heels as they're known, are often foreigners, or locals playing foreigners.
I'd love to see that.
A few rapid-fire examples of this, Linz. In the wake of World War II, the German Fritz von Erich terrorized America. He was actually Texan.
Fritz von Erich.
During the height of the Cold War, Ivan Koloff, the Russian bear, had the Mid-Atlantic region at his mercy. In the WWF in 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, the all-American Sergeant Slaughter turned his back on the good old US of A to align himself with the villainous Iron Sheik as an Iraqi sympathizer.
Oh my God.
Now, as we all know, Hulk Hogan defeated Sergeant Slaughter at WrestleMania 7 and ended the Gulf War there and then, and Iraq was never, ever, 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 ever a problem to the USA again.
Oh no.
Brother, I know exactly what...
It's going to be just like Saddam Hussein's reign over Kuwait, brother. It's going to be only temporary.
Following on from the start of the War on Terror, the villainous Mohammed Hussein wreaked havoc on the WWE. The point is if your character ain't from here, you must be a bad guy. And the same theory goes in Japan. Following on from the defeat by the Allies in World War II, Rikidozan defeated American after American after American, helping the nation to jingoistically get their win back, in a metaphorical sense, of course. This was a winning formula, and it all started that night with the two Sharp brothers. I mean, actually, the match went to a 60-minute time limit draw, but you have to start somewhere.
60?
60 minutes. Of course, Rikidozan wasn't actually Japanese, but in pro wrestling, it often isn't what you are, but what you become. Now, in an aside, Rikidozan's partner that night was Masahiro Kimura, and he is Japan's greatest judoka, having never been defeated in a judo match from 1963 to 1950. Now, if you're a mixed martial arts fan, he is the Kimura in the Kimura lock. He is a legit badass who blazed a trail in fight sports. Now, that being said, Kimura got a little bit jealous as the tour continued, that he was not being publicised quite as much as Rikidozan. And eventually, he broke kayfabe. Do you remember what that is?
Kayfabe, is that just your little actor role?
Yeah, it's the sort of fake world of professional wrestling. It's the method acting, if you will, of professional wrestling when you are kind of living the storyline.
Oh yeah, kayfabe is so if your enemy's in the ring, you can't hang out outside, or if your assistant is someone else's wife, you have to hang out with them after the matches too, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, kayfabe's crazy.
So he broke kayfabe when he told a newspaper,
"We should determine who is the best in Japan. Ricky works only for show, and he'll be no match if I fight seriously."
Kimura may have had other motives for the challenge. His wife was suffering from tuberculosis, which he needed to pay for. His own wrestling federation was not faring anywhere near as well as the JWA. Rikidozan accepted this challenge under pro wrestling, i.e. choreographed rules. But as the two squared off, work turned into a shoot. Work being two wrestlers working together to put on a show, and shoot being a real shoot fight, as they're known. In the ring, Kimura let a swift kick loose into Rikidozan's groin, who responded by punching him square in the head. Rikidozan forced Kimura into the corner and began chopping him down like a tree. And in 3 strikes, the judo champion was out on the floor, and Rikidozan's hand was raised as the first heavyweight champion of Japan.
Ooh.
Now, after one more bout with the Japanese judoka, Rikidozan refused to fight another Japanese wrestler ever again, and from that point only battled evil foreigners.
Rebrand.
Rikidozan's star continued to rise, and the JWA dominated, touring Japan and making a killing. In 1956, Shinsaku Nitta, the shady backer of the JWA, passed away, and Rikidozan was left in sole control of the company. Everything was going well in front of the camera, but behind the scenes, Rikidozan was getting a massive ego and was styling himself as the king of Japanese sports. He began investing in apartment blocks, sports stadiums, and other ventures. He drank like a fish and partied harder than anyone. The JWA was making big money, but it cost a lot to pay out for these foreign wrestlers. So he cozied up to some right-wing figures with deep connections to the underworld to fund his status as Japan's greatest wrestler, even giving them positions of power within the company.
So he's Mafia, basically.
Pretty much.
Oh gosh, this can't end well.
Now, he did manage to bring over the previously mentioned Lou Thez to Japan in the first ever NWA Championship defense in Asia. To illustrate just how important Rikidozan was to Japan in the 50s, 87% of the television-owning public tuned in to watch the bout. How mental is that?
That's crazy. Like, 80% of people don't tune in to watch anything now.
No way.
Although I guess we have the internet and there probably wasn't that much to do back then, but still.
But even with just a couple of channels on the television to get an 87% market share is nuts.
That's crazy.
Now, his training facility, mentioned earlier, began to pay dividends as well, as two of the most important figures in Japanese wrestling went on to debut in 1960 for the JWA, Antonio Inoki and Shohei Giant Baba. But
Shohei Giant Baba.
Yes.
That's the worst name ever.
Well, Shohei's his first name, Baba's his last name, and he is a giant, so he's Giant Baba.
Okay, big baby. Got it.
But more on them later. Now, the NWA would never let the title leave America, and Rikidozan knew that. So he decided that the rival American promotion, the WWA, would be his ultimate prize. So he travelled to America to defeat Freddie Blassie, having paid a promoter $25,000 for the privilege.
Oh, so, okay.
Now, $25,000 in today's money would be roughly $233,000.
Holy shit.
So this was no small exchange back in the day.
Yeah, he really wanted to be on top.
Freddie Blassie was coming to Japan to get his title back, and by the time he landed in Narita Airport, he was the biggest villain the country had ever seen inside a squared circle. Claiming to file his teeth down to points to get an advantage on his opponents, he gleefully bit into Japanese opponents' foreheads, and reportedly sent multiple elderly Japanese residents to hospital with heart complications.
Chris, please tell me he didn't actually bite into his Japanese opponents' foreheads. For real. Please tell me that's just some kind of wrestling magic.
That would be real.
He didn't file his teeth down.
No, he didn't file his teeth down.
That would hurt like hell.
What I'd imagine they would do is that they would blade, which is where you get a small razor blade and you make an incision on the hairline, which bleeds profusely but heals quite quickly, and then he would just chomp down on it because AIDS hadn't been invented yet.
Oh my god. You know that is the blading thing is the only thing I know about wrestling, I think. Like, I know that's what they do. Because I did look it up once, because I was like, they're covered in blood. Blood looks real. Don't know where blood came from. It's like, oh, they're actually cutting themselves. Okay. Mm-hmm. I was thinking like horror movie style, like blood packs.
I mean, a lot of people think that, but that's quite difficult to like implement
hide in your Speedos.
On the fly. You know, I mean, oh man, the worst thing. Do you know where a lot of wrestlers keep their razor blades?
Between their butt cheeks.
No.
With the mufflers.
No, but in their actual cheeks.
Oh my god, that's horrific.
Yep.
What? No, but they're wrapped in paper or something.
I don't actually know.
God, that's
sick. Some will tape them to the top of their wrists, not the dangerous side, the top side of the wrist.
Yeah.
But I know that some will keep them in their mouths.
Oh, that's gross. No, I don't like that. That's horrible. That's horrific. I hope they keep them in there with like some like rubber around the blade. Oh god, no. Sick. Gross.
Now, Rikidozan lost the belt that he'd paid $23,000 for in Los Angeles after a stoppage due to blood loss.
Jesus Christ.
But he'd made his point. He was an international champion as well as the king of Japanese sports. Besides, when he returned to Japan, he claimed it had all been a plot anyway. He didn't really lose. Jealous Americans had conspired to hold him back.
Of course. A bad workman always blames the Americans.
The real thing that was holding Rikidozan back was his bad attitude and personal demons, which is pro wrestling speak for excessive overindulgences. And in Rikidozan's case, it was alcohol.
Oh, jeez. Of course it was.
Now, alcohol is a huge part of Japanese culture, and it's an even larger part of pro wrestling culture. Alcohol was frequently provided to wrestlers after the events as part of their benefits package. Rikidozan had developed a reputation as a serious drinker and was often spotted around Tokyo's Asakusa district frequenting the bars. He often skipped the shower after his match and headed straight out to the bar, and when patrons asked him about his bruises or the bloodstains, he would reply that he'd had a tough day at work.
That's pretty cool, to be honest.
Now, Ricky continued to battle in the ring against American heels such as the Destroyer and out of the ring with his partying lifestyle. Burning the candle at both ends also brought with it a serious attitude problem. Rikidozan was reportedly a confrontational individual who was quick to solve issues with violence. On the 8th of April 1962, Rikidozan would go on his last bender. He was drinking with sumo contacts regarding promoting sumo events together in the USA, before then heading over to a radio interview on a popular radio show. Now, the show went well, but Ricky was clearly a bit schlizzard, and then headed out to the New Latin Quarter Club, which is in the basement of the Prudential Tower Hotel, which was at the time the most modern and happening hotel in Tokyo. The club was abuzz with music and dancing when the larger-than-life Rikidozan burst through the doors and began hurling insults at the musicians performing on stage.
Nanda kono ongaku wa kusso da. Sugu yamero.
What were they playing?
I'm imagining that it was sort of like, you know, the Star Wars Cantina music.
The sumo bursts through. Like a sumo-shaped hole. I can't imagine. But like when you said he would drink with his like sumo contacts, I can't imagine sumos all gathering in a bar drinking. Like, where would they sit? How big is this bar?
At the table.
What do they drink? How much do they drink? Can they get drunk?
Where do they sit at the table? How much do they drink? A lot. And can they get drunk? Oh, yes.
Yeah, but it'd have to be a pretty big table.
Where there's a will, there's a way. I'm going to send you an image here.
Okay.
Here are some sumo on a flight to Hokkaido.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. We'll put this on the Instagram at d.s.radio. That is one very... There's no... what do you call it?
There's no aisle
There's no aisle. Sorry. There's no aisle to push the cart down. There's no aisle. There's just men. Big men. I think there's some normal passengers too who are just sandwiched between a sumo and the wall of the plane.
Yeah, there's a guy kind of at the back left who's sat next to a sumo but clearly isn't one and has just got his eyes closed thinking...
Yeah, he's like, oh God.
It's just an hour and 20 minutes. It's just an hour and 20 minutes. It's just an hour and 20 minutes.
This is an amazing picture. So now I can see how sumos would fit into the bar, just casually. Thanks, Chris.
Now, the most widely accepted version of what happened next comes from court transcripts. And this was that Rikidozan was busy flirting with a hostess at the club when a man pushed into him.
One-san, ore no kinyuku suki ka?
Riki-sama.
Oh, nani shitteru nda? Baka yaro!
This man was 24-year-old Katsushi Murata, who was unknowingly a low-ranking member of the Sumiyoshi Kai Yakuza family.
Aren't they always? Everyone's in the Yakuza there.
Well, they are, but you just never know who they're from.
Yeah.
Later at trial, Murata said,
My shoulder may have touched yours. You're a big man, and it couldn't be helped in such a small, narrow space.
Rikidozan shoved Murata, and accused him of stepping on his shoe. Murata refused to back down to the towering mountain of muscle, and Rikidozan pushed him to the ground in the lobby of the club before mounting him and raining blows down on his head. Murata pulled from his belt a 13.5-inch blade and stabbed Rikidozan in the left side of his stomach. Rikidozan pulled back and Murata fled into the crowd. Enraged, Rikidozan took the stage, interrupting the band yet again to announce, "There's a killer in this club. You'd better go home right away." Ricky was surrounded by his entourage, who encouraged him to go to a hospital, as Ricky laughed off the wound and continued drinking and partying in his blood-stained shirt.
Ricky, why do you do it?
After he was finished, he didn't want to attract publicity by visiting a regular hospital, so he turned up at a gynecological facility near his apartment. He convinced the gynecologist, who he was friendly with and could trust to keep the story out of the press, to look him over.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't have the parts to be looked over.
Realising that the wound was quite serious, the gynecologist came to that same conclusion and invited a nearby surgeon to come and perform the operation. Rikidozan's small intestine had been pierced in 4 places, but the wound was quite survivable. He was ordered to go home and rest, and under no circumstances eat or drink.
Uh-oh.
Now, Katsushi Murata had escaped the club and was quickly located by members of the Tokon Gosai, who were a gang who were very friendly with Rikidozan, and they promptly beat the living shit out of him. After a brief hospital visit, he brought his puffy, black and blue face to his Yakuza boss, Kunasa Kobayashi, who reprimanded him and in a uniquely Japanese way demanded that he go to Rikidozan's apartment, located in, and I shit you not, Ricky Mansions, a tower block that Ricky owned and lived at the top of, in order to apologise. Now, let's go back to Rikidozan, and remember I said the one thing that Rikidozan was ordered not to do was to eat or drink? Well, guess what Rikidozan was doing?
Ate and drank.
He was in the middle of knocking back sake and halfway through a KFC bucket when Murata and Kobayashi arrived at his apartment.
What a combination. Sake and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Now, Ricky heard their apologies and Kobayashi's full acceptance of the responsibility for his underling's mistake and forgave them.
Oh. He was really drunk and probably feeling quite generous and warm-hearted.
The men left the apartment and Rikidozan continued to drink and party in private. At 9:50 p.m, 8 days later, Rikidozan was dead, aged 39.
No!
By specifically ignoring the one thing the doctor had asked him not to do.
No KFC.
He signed his own death warrant.
Aw, I'm sad though, honestly. I didn't think he was that young either.
Yeah.
He's not even 40.
The bravado of the King of Japan was his undoing. He developed peritonitis, a severe inflammation of the intestine wall. Now, peritonitis has a mortality rate of under 10% when properly treated and cared for. Rikidozan had received the proper treatment, but he did not heed the doctor's warnings and care for it appropriately.
Well, he was drunk as a skunk, let's be honest.
Around this time, Masahiko Kimura popped his head up once again to say, very helpfully, in the press,
"It was not Murata, but me who killed Rikidozan. I cursed him to death."
Thanks for that. However, it was Murata that was convicted of manslaughter in 1964 for 8 years. After being released, he rose up the ranks of the Yakuza and reportedly became the head of his own gang.
Damn.
He claimed that every year he would visit the grave of Rikidozan and pray, as well as call Rikidozan's sons to apologise each year that passed. Now, in a very odd turn of events, Murata's daughter would attempt to become a pro wrestler, although she never achieved much success. She also became a MMA fighter, but has been inactive since 2011 when she lost via tap out to, and I can't believe I'm saying this, George Lucas's daughter.
What? Is that actually a thing?
Yeah, George Lucas's daughter became an MMA fighter.
Holy shit. Well, that's something to look up after the episode.
Now, Rikidozan's public funeral was reportedly attended by over 12,000 people, and front and centre were his two top students, Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba. They continued flying the JWA's flag in memory of their mentor. But in the years that passed, the promotion began to decline. Realising that the JWA was dead, the two protégés of Rikidozan understood pro wrestling needed to go in a different direction to be successful in Japan. However, they respectfully disagreed on how to do this, and each founded their own individual company. Baba launching All Japan Pro Wrestling in the style of the American NWA promotion, and Inoki founding New Japan Pro Wrestling, based on a more serious sports-style presentation. These days, the lines between the two promotions are blurred, and they generally present the same style, but originally they were very different beasts. Inoki and Baba are the two enduring figures of professional wrestling, both successful, both world champions, and both disciples of Rikidozan. Inoki in particular emulated his senpai in more ways than one, and adopted his larger-than-life personality, although without the addictions. Inoki was preoccupied throughout his career with honouring Rikidozan. Any guesses on how he would do that?
No clue.
By attempting to bring peace to North Korea through pro wrestling.
That didn't work out.
Antonio Inoki has visited North Korea over 30 times.
Oh.
And in 1995, attempted his most successful diplomatic breakthrough through sport by arranging Japanese New Japan and American WCW wrestlers perform at the Collision in Korea event, reportedly attended by 165,000 people, none of which knew what pro wrestling was.
I was gonna say, do they get much pro wrestling over there?
They don't, but they did know that Antonio Inoki was the student of Rikidozan, and the restrained and honestly quite confused crowd came alive when Antonio Inoki stepped through the curtain to do battle with the evil American Ric Flair.
Ric Flair?
Woo!
This is completely bizarre, Chris, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm listening to this story, and the whole way through I'm just like, what the hell?
Seems quite normal to me.
Just a normal day for Chris. I was honestly thinking that we were going to have like a Rougemont moment where you go, and it's all bullshit. But no, apparently this is right up until the end. This is a real thing. This happened.
Despite the roaring success of that event and the diplomatic inroads that it did make with North Korea, the event did not bring an end to the tensions on the Korean border. Inoki,
shocker.
I know. Inoki entered into politics, twice holding positions in Japanese government, and both times using his influence to try and repair Japanese-North Korean relations. Inoki is a kind of cult and personality that is rarely seen in Western politics. In just one example, in 1991, 41 Japanese were taken hostage by Saddam Hussein in Iraq during the Gulf War. Inoki took it upon himself to go on an unofficial one-man diplomatic mission to negotiate the release of the hostages with Saddam Hussein, and succeeded.
You are shitting me.
No. After arranging a wrestling event in Iraq for Saddam, 36 of the hostages were released. If anybody can solve the North Korean crisis, it might just be Antonio Inoki, who is still going strong at the age of 79.
Yes, I totally underestimated all of this. Is crazy. I love this story.
I mean, who would have thought that, Rikidozan's legacy not only leaves a mark on the Japanese world of pro wrestling, but trickles all the way down into North Korean politics.
That's insane. But then again, North Korea seems to have something going on with sports stars.
Exactly. Then was Dennis Rodman.
Exactly.
All of that stuff. Who was also a pro wrestler, but that's a story for another time.
What? Okay, yeah. Okay, there's definitely more of the wrestling world to tap into, and it definitely connects to politics and a lot of other true crime, a lot of other topics that we don't think it would be connected to. North Korean politics, okay. That's a new one.
And North Korea has in subsequent years adopted the figure of Rikidozan, as they call him, as a national symbol of pride. He's been featured on stamps and in propaganda, a Korean hero who journeyed to the land of a rising sun and around the world, defeating the evil Americans and the hated Japanese.
Not sure how I feel about that, but still, very interesting story.
Rikidozan was undoubtedly a shady figure who at the very best had a toe dipped into the underworld and at the worst was completely submerged. His bravado was his end. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, he's emerged into a godlike figure of professional wrestling in Japan. So, Linz, that is the story of Rikidozan, who met an unfortunate early end at the hands of the Yakuza. But what do you think about today's story?
I'm mind blown. Like, I love it when you tell me a wrestling story and it starts, like, because we have a lot of these conversations in private too, not just on the podcast, and you'll tell me some wrestling news or some little side story that I would not otherwise know about, and it's always completely bonkers and amazing. And I really appreciate these stories. Like, you don't have to be a fan of wrestling to appreciate these characters themselves. Like, it's really interesting. And this was requested that you do a full episode.
It was
on a wrestling related case. So here we have it.
We do. We might dip our toe back in again at some time, but don't worry, this won't become an every month thing. We'll leave these stories to be an occasional dip into the world, the insane world of professional wrestling.
When requested, they will be presented. So, speaking of upcoming topics, we have a classic DSR haunting, paranormal, strange story coming up for you that I have been researching the hell out of and talking to different people. So,
ooh.
Yeah. So, that'll be in 2 weeks' time, right, Chris?
2 weeks' time when we'll be releasing that episode. So join us then. But just before we leave you, just a couple of things I'd like to say. So firstly, I would just like to credit Wrestling Stories for their excellent piece on Rikidozan, which really helped to tie together some of the more confusing aspects of his life. So please check out prowrestlingstories.com if you'd like to read more on Rikidozan. And for the several people who've been sending me wrestling memes over the last couple of weeks to the DSR Instagram at d.s.radio, don't stop. So we'll see you next time when Linz is going to be telling us another story.
Yes, a very creepy, strange, unusual, and local to us story.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
We'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Sweet. You want to say hello, Linz?
Hello.
Hey.
Hello, little one. Oh. Hello, little man.
It's Auntie Lindsay. It's looking very confused.
Hello, little man.
Hey, dude.
Oh.
Oh, just headbutted the microphone.